The rain was falling in soft, steady rhythms outside Olivia Harper's office window, a backdrop that matched her restless mood. She sat at her desk, surrounded by neatly stacked legal briefs and an open laptop that glowed with the draft of yet another meticulously worded contract. The rain blurred the city skyline, and for a moment, Olivia allowed herself to stare into the haze, her mind wandering. She felt an ache she couldn't quite name, a gnawing emptiness that seemed to grow louder with each passing day. From the outside, Olivia's life was pristine. At 32, she was a successful attorney at a prestigious law firm in downtown Seattle. Her engagement to Richard Carlson, a kind and accomplished surgeon, was a picture-perfect match. Together, they were the couple everyone admired. Stable, polished, and on the verge of building a future others envied. Yet beneath the surface, Olivia felt like a stranger in her own life. That evening, Olivia returned home to their elegant apartment in Queen Anne. The space was modern but warm, meticulously decorated to reflect a life of order and refinement. Richard was already home, wearing the comfortable sweater she had bought him for his birthday, standing at the kitchen island and slicing vegetables for dinner. "Hey Liv," he greeted her with his signature easy smile. "How was your day?" Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second, then forced a smile. "Busy as usual. How about you?" "Same. Long surgery but it went well," Richard said, glancing up briefly before returning to his task. "I was thinking we could go over the wedding seating chart after dinner. We need to finalize it by tomorrow." "Of course," Olivia replied automatically. Her smile lingered, but her chest tightened at the mention of the wedding. The thought of it, the ceremony, the vows, the endless expectations, filled her not with joy but dread. She told herself it was just stress, the pressure of planning such a significant event, but deep down she knew it was more than that. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder as she moved past him, his touch warm and reassuring. "You've been working too hard," he said. "After the wedding we'll finally have time to relax." Olivia nodded, her throat tightening. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this life she had carefully built, this path she had followed so diligently, would bring her the peace and fulfillment she craved. But as she kissed his cheek and moved to change out of her work clothes, the emptiness followed her, like a shadow she couldn't escape. The next afternoon, Olivia found herself in a cozy cafe near her office, a place she often visited for a break from the monotony of her day. The cafe was warm and inviting, filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the quiet hum of conversation. Olivia sat near the window, her laptop open, reviewing documents for an upcoming case. Rain pattered softly against the glass, and she tried to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of her work. But then she felt it, a presence subtle but insistent. Someone was watching her. She looked up, her gaze scanning the room until it landed on a woman sitting a few tables away. She was striking in a way that felt effortless, her short, tousled hair framing a face that was both sharp and soft, with deep, intense eyes that seemed to see straight through Olivia. The woman held a book in her hands, but she wasn't reading it. She was looking at Olivia, her expression calm, almost amused. Olivia's breath caught. She quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing with an embarrassment she couldn't quite explain. She tried to refocus on her laptop, but her thoughts scattered. The moment lingered, her awareness of the stranger sharpening with every passing second. She could feel the weight of those eyes, the unspoken question they carried. When Olivia dared to glance up again, the woman smiled, just a small, enigmatic curve of her lips, before returning to her book. Olivia's pulse quickened. She had no idea why this moment felt so electric, so charged, but it did. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too warm, the air around her thick with something she couldn't name. She forced herself to focus on her screen, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through the document. But it was impossible to concentrate. Her eyes drifted back to the woman again and again, drawn by a pull she couldn't resist. When their gazes met for the third time, the woman stood, her movements slow and deliberate. Olivia's heart raced as the stranger walked past her table, the faint scent of something earthy and floral lingering in the air. And then, just as the woman reached the door, something fell, a small piece of paper fluttering to the floor near Olivia's chair. She picked it up, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. Written in neat, looping handwriting was a single word: call. Beneath it was a phone number. For the rest of the day, Olivia couldn't shake the encounter. The paper felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket, its presence both thrilling and terrifying. She told herself it was absurd. This stranger was nothing more than a fleeting moment of curiosity, a distraction. She had a fiancé, a life, a carefully constructed future. She couldn't risk it all for something so fleeting, so reckless. And yet, when she was alone that night, sitting in the dim light of her living room while Richard worked late at the hospital, Olivia found herself holding the note. Her thumb brushed over the ink, her mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? Why had she left the note? And why, despite everything, did Olivia feel like calling that number might be the most important decision she would ever make? The cafe was a sanctuary against the gray, rain-soaked afternoon. The soft glow of vintage bulbs hung from exposed beams, casting warm light over the rustic wooden tables and mismatched chairs. The air carried the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with hints of cinnamon and vanilla, creating an inviting cocoon from the storm outside. Olivia sat at a corner table near the window, her laptop open in front of her. Outside, the rain blurred the world into muted shades of gray, a mirror to the restlessness that churned in her chest. She scrolled through the dense legal document on her screen, the words blurring together. Despite her best efforts, her focus kept slipping. The hum of conversation around her became distant, like static in the background of her own spiraling thoughts. Her pen tapped against the edge of her notebook, an absent-minded rhythm that betrayed her growing frustration. She needed to finish this brief, but her mind refused to cooperate. She sipped her latte hoping the caffeine would sharpen her focus, but instead she felt the familiar tug of that gnawing emptiness, the feeling that had been haunting her for weeks, maybe months. It whispered questions she wasn't ready to answer. Was this it? Was this the life she had worked so hard for? It was then she felt it. A subtle yet undeniable sensation, like a prickling awareness along the back of her neck. Someone was watching her. Olivia hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She glanced around the room, trying not to seem obvious, and her eyes landed on a woman sitting a few tables away. She was alone, leaning back in her chair with one leg crossed over the other, a book open in her lap. Her posture was relaxed, almost lazy, but there was an unmistakable intensity in the way her eyes lingered on Olivia. The woman's gaze was piercing, her eyes the kind of deep, stormy blue that seemed to hold secrets and stories Olivia couldn't begin to unravel. Her short, slightly messy hair framed her angular face, and the hint of a smirk tugged at the corner of her lips, as though she knew something Olivia didn't. She wore a dark leather jacket over a simple gray t-shirt, her look effortlessly bold and utterly magnetic. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't understand the pull she felt, the way her breath caught under the weight of the stranger's stare. It wasn't just attraction, though that was undeniable. It was something deeper, a quiet but powerful recognition, as if this woman could see something inside her Olivia had spent years hiding. Their eyes locked and Olivia froze. Her pulse quickened and the noise of the cafe seemed to fade away. For a moment, it felt as though they were the only two people in the room. The woman didn't look away, didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable but brimming with confidence. And then she smiled. It was a small, enigmatic smile, but it carried a weight that sent a jolt through Olivia, as if the woman had reached out and touched her. It wasn't a friendly smile, nor was it mocking. It was knowing, as though she had peeled back the layers Olivia had spent her life carefully constructing and seen something she wasn't ready to face. Before Olivia could process what was happening, the woman turned her attention back to her book. The moment was over, but the electricity in the air remained, crackling and alive. Olivia tried to shake it off, returning her gaze to her laptop, but the words on the screen now seemed even more meaningless. She stole another glance at the woman, unable to help herself. She was still reading, her fingers idly tracing the edge of the page, but there was a faint smile on her lips, as though she knew Olivia was watching her. This is ridiculous, Olivia thought, her cheeks flushing. She felt like a teenager caught staring at her crush in class. But the magnetic pull of the stranger was impossible to ignore. There was something about her, an aura of mystery, of danger even, that made Olivia's carefully ordered world feel dull by comparison. Why was she looking at me? The thought echoed in Olivia's mind, mingling with a rush of curiosity and unease. She had never been looked at like that before, not even by Richard. The intensity of it, the sheer boldness, unsettled her in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Her laptop chimed with a notification, jolting her back to reality. She blinked, forcing herself to focus, but her hands trembled as she typed. She tried to tell herself it didn't mean anything, that it was just a passing glance, a fleeting moment that she was blowing out of proportion. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore the way her heart continued to race. The minutes ticked by, and Olivia found herself hyper-aware of every movement the woman made. The way she turned a page in her book, the way she sipped her coffee, the way her eyes occasionally flicked up from the text as if she could feel Olivia's gaze. Each gesture was deliberate, unhurried, and impossibly alluring. Finally, the woman closed her book and stood, sliding it into a worn leather satchel slung over her shoulder. Olivia's chest tightened as she watched her approach the door, half relieved and half disappointed that the moment was ending. But as the woman passed Olivia's table, she paused. Olivia's breath caught as the stranger glanced down at her, their eyes meeting one final time. The faint smile returned, and Olivia swore she saw a flicker of amusement in those deep blue eyes. "Have a good afternoon," the woman said, her voice low and smooth like the first sip of a strong whiskey. Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, the woman continued toward the exit. It wasn't until the door chimed shut behind her that Olivia noticed the small piece of paper fluttering to the floor near her chair. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The paper was simple, folded once, with a single word written in bold, looping handwriting: "Call." Beneath it was a phone number. Olivia stared at the note, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might drown out the rain outside. She glanced toward the door, but the woman was gone, leaving only the faint scent of something earthy and floral in her wake. Her pulse raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions. Who was this woman? Why had she left the note? And why, despite every rational part of her screaming to throw it away, did Olivia feel an irresistible pull to call that number? Olivia couldn't stop herself. Her attention kept drifting back to the woman, no matter how much she tried to focus on the legal brief glowing on her laptop screen. It wasn't just the magnetic presence of the stranger or the way she seemed completely at ease with the world around her. It was something else, something Olivia couldn't quite name, like an invisible tether that kept pulling her gaze across the room. The woman sat with her legs crossed, her body angled slightly toward the window but not enough to hide her from Olivia's view. Her fingers turned the pages of her book slowly, deliberately, as if savoring each word. Her free hand rested on the table, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with absent-minded precision. Every movement was measured, unhurried, and yet there was an intensity in the way she occupied the space, as if she belonged there completely. Olivia tried to be subtle, her eyes darting up every few moments to steal glances. The stranger's dark, slightly tousled hair caught the soft glow of the cafe's lights, and her leather jacket clung to her frame in a way that exuded effortless cool. She looked like someone who had stories to tell, secrets to share. Olivia's stomach tightened with a nervous energy she hadn't felt in years. As Olivia watched, she began to notice the small details. The way the woman's lips curled ever so slightly as she read, as if the words amused her. The faint smudge of ink on her index finger, hinting at a creative mind. The steady, unbothered rhythm of her breathing, as if she were completely at home in her own skin. It was the kind of confidence Olivia envied, the kind she often pretended to have but never truly felt. Then, without warning, the stranger lifted her head and their eyes met. The moment stretched like elastic, taut and humming with energy. Olivia's breath caught, her heart hammering in her chest. She couldn't look away no matter how much she wanted to. The stranger's gaze was steady, piercing, and yet there was a softness to it, a hint of curiosity that made Olivia's skin flush. It was as if she were seeing right through her, peeling back the layers of Olivia's carefully constructed life and uncovering something raw, something real. And then, just as casually as she had looked up, the woman returned to her book as if the moment had never happened. Olivia blinked, her cheeks burning. She turned back to her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, but the words on the screen had lost all meaning. She felt exposed, like the stranger's gaze had reached inside her and pulled something loose, something she hadn't even realized was trapped. The air around her seemed charged, the hum of the cafe growing louder as her own thoughts spiraled. "Stop it," Olivia told herself. "You're imagining things. He's just a random person. This doesn't mean anything." But even as she tried to convince herself, she felt her gaze drifting back to the woman. The way her fingers lingered on the pages of her book, the way her lips moved slightly as she read, as if tasting the words. Olivia noticed the small tattoo on the inside of her wrist, an abstract shape she couldn't quite make out. He wanted to know what it meant, what had inspired it. Why am I doing this? He thought, her pulse racing. Why can't I stop? The stranger shifted in her seat, stretching slightly, and Olivia caught herself holding her breath. When their eyes met again, the faintest smile tugged at the corners of the woman's lips. It wasn't a full smile, more of an acknowledgement, but it sent a jolt through Olivia's chest all the same. Olivia looked away quickly, staring down at her laptop as if her life depended on it. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, her mind spinning. She felt ridiculous, like a teenager with a crush, but there was something about the moment that felt significant. Like the universe had shifted slightly, setting her on a path she didn't even know existed. The woman closed her book with a quiet thud, slipping it into a worn leather satchel. Olivia tried not to watch as she stood, pulling her jacket tighter around her. She moved with a kind of deliberate grace, unhurried and self-assured. As she walked toward the door, Olivia felt a pang of disappointment, as if she were losing something she hadn't even had. And then it happened. Just as the woman passed Olivia's table, a small slip of paper fluttered to the floor. Olivia's eyes widened as she realized it had come from the stranger's hand. She hesitated for a moment, glancing up, but the woman didn't stop. She walked out of the cafe without a backward glance, the door chiming softly behind her. Olivia reached down, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the paper. It was folded once, and as she opened it, her breath hitched. The handwriting was bold and confident, the ink slightly smudged. There was no name, no explanation, just a single word. Call. Below it was a phone number. For a long moment, Olivia just stared at the paper, her mind racing. Her first instinct was disbelief. This couldn't be real. This kind of thing didn't happen to her. Strangers didn't leave her notes, didn't disrupt the carefully balanced life she had built for herself. But here it was, tangible and undeniable. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper, her pulse pounding in her ears. She glanced out the window, hoping for one last glimpse of the woman, but she was gone, swallowed by the rain. Olivia's thoughts spiraled. Who was she? Why had she left the note? What did she want? And why, despite every rational part of Olivia's mind screaming that this was reckless and absurd, did she feel an irresistible pull to call that number? She slipped the paper into her pocket, her heart still racing. Something had shifted inside her, something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just curiosity or attraction. It was a longing, a spark of desire for something more than the life she had so meticulously planned. For the first time in years, Olivia felt truly awake. And it terrified her. The slip of paper burned a hole in Olivia's pocket for 3 days. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The bold handwriting, the simplicity of the word call, and the stranger who had left it behind like a breadcrumb meant to lead Olivia into unknown territory. At work, her thoughts strayed from depositions and contracts to flashes of deep blue eyes, a faint smirk, the casual grace with which the woman had moved. At home, even Richard's steady presence couldn't quiet the hum in her mind. The paper sat on her nightstand, folded neatly, a silent invitation she couldn't bring herself to accept, or throw away. On the third night, after another restless dinner where Richard chatted about wedding plans she barely registered, Olivia found herself alone in the living room. The house was quiet, the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows. Richard had gone to bed early, exhausted from another long shift at the hospital. Olivia sat on the couch, staring at the paper in her hands. Her phone lay beside her, the screen dark, waiting. She had typed the number into her contacts earlier, her fingers trembling as she named it simply unknown. Her thumb hovered over the screen now, torn between the logical part of her brain screaming at her to let it go and the insistent magnetic pull she couldn't ignore. Finally, with a deep breath, she opened a blank message and typed, "Hi. This is Olivia. From the cafe." Her heart pounded as she hit send, her thumb freezing over the screen as if she could take it back. The seconds dragged, each one heavier than the last. Just as she was about to convince herself the message had been a mistake, her phone buzzed. The reply was immediate. "I was wondering when you'd text. Same cafe. Tomorrow at 6? Olivia stared at the words, her breath catching. She could feel the thrill coursing through her veins, a mix of fear and anticipation. Her fingers trembled as she typed back. Oh. The next day crawled by. Olivia's focus was non-existent, her nerves frayed as she cycled through every possible scenario. What would she say? What did this woman want? And why, despite the chaos the situation promised to bring, did she feel an almost gravitational pull toward the encounter? By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, Olivia was a bundle of tension. She arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, choosing the same corner table she had occupied days before. The rain outside was lighter tonight, the sky streaked with faint hues of purple as the city settled into its evening rhythm. She clutched her latte with both hands, her foot tapping nervously under the table. The door chimed and Olivia's heart leapt into her throat. There she was, the stranger from before, as striking as Olivia remembered. Her short hair was damp from the rain, and her leather jacket gleamed faintly in the warm cafe light. She carried herself with an easy confidence, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Olivia. She smiled. Olivia froze, her pulse hammering as the woman approached. She sat across from Olivia without hesitation, setting a small sketchbook on the table before shrugging off her jacket. "You came," the woman said, her voice low and smooth, the edges of her words curling like smoke. Olivia swallowed hard. Yes." The woman chuckled, leaning back in her chair. "Relax. I don't bite." Sorry," Olivia said, her cheeks flushing. "I'm not sure what to say." "That's okay," the woman replied, her lips twitching into a smirk. "I'll go first. I'm Alex." Alex extended a hand, her movements casual but deliberate. Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it. Alex's grip was firm, her palm warm against Olivia's slightly trembling fingers. "Olivia," she said softly. "I know," Alex replied, her smirk deepening. "You don't exactly fade into the background." Olivia's cheeks burned at the compliment, and she quickly looked down at her drink. "So, why did you leave me the note?" Alex tilted her head, studying Olivia with an intensity that made her heart race. "Because you looked like you needed it," she said simply. What?" Alex leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "You were sitting here, surrounded by all your work, looking like you were drowning. And then you kept staring at me, so I figured, maybe I could throw you a lifeline." Olivia's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. She wasn't sure whether to be flattered or embarrassed, or both. "I wasn't staring," she said weakly. Alex laughed, a low, rich sound that sent shivers down Olivia's spine. "Sure you weren't." The conversation flowed more easily than Olivia had expected. Alex had a way of drawing her out, her questions pointed but never invasive, her demeanor open and unfiltered. She talked about her work as an artist, about how she moved from place to place, capturing fragments of life on her canvases. Her words painted pictures as vivid as the art she described, and Olivia found herself leaning in, captivated. "What about you?" Alex asked after a while, her gaze locking onto Olivia's. "What do you do when you're not staring at strangers in cafes?" Olivia laughed nervously. "I'm a lawyer. Corporate contracts mostly. Nothing exciting." "Sounds suffocating," Alex said, her tone blunt but not unkind. "Is that why you looked so lost the other day?" Olivia's smile faltered, her heart tightening. "I don't know. Maybe." Alex's expression softened, her eyes searching Olivia's face. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice quiet but cutting through Olivia like a blade. The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Was she happy? She had never stopped to ask herself that. Not really. Her life was fine. Her career was successful. Her fiancé was everything anyone could want. But happiness? That was a question she wasn't sure how to answer. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex nodded as if she had expected the answer. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing lightly against Olivia's hand. The touch was fleeting but electric, sending a jolt through Olivia that she felt down to her core. "Well," Alex said, her voice warm but laced with a challenge, "maybe it's time to figure that out." By the time Olivia left the cafe, her mind was spinning. Alex had left her with more questions than answers, but for the first time in years, Olivia felt something stirring inside her. Something that scared her but also exhilarated her. As she stepped into the rain, the memory of Alex's touch lingered, a spark that refused to fade. The cafe felt smaller, quieter, as if the world outside had faded into irrelevance. Olivia sat across from Alex, her hands clasped tightly around her latte, the warmth barely soothing the nervous tremor in her fingers. Alex, by contrast, was utterly composed. She leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed but somehow commanding, her piercing eyes fixed on Olivia with an intensity that made her feel both seen and unraveled. "You're quiet," Alex said, her tone laced with curiosity rather than judgment. "What's on your mind?" Olivia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. She wasn't used to this, being the center of attention in such a raw, unguarded way. "I'm just processing," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. Alex tilted her head, her smirk softening into something more thoughtful. "Processing what?" Olivia exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the question. "I don't know. You." She paused, biting her lip. "I'm not really used to whatever this is." Alex's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "You mean someone asking you real questions?" The words hung in the air, cutting through Olivia like a blade. She felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of embarrassment and recognition swirling in her chest. Alex wasn't wrong. Most conversations in Olivia's life were surface-level, carefully curated exchanges designed to maintain harmony. Nobody pressed her too hard or looked too closely. Not Richard. Not her colleagues. Not even herself. "I guess so," Olivia admitted, her voice barely audible. Alex leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Then let me ask you something real," she said, her tone low but direct. "Are you happy, Olivia?" The question hit Olivia like a thunderclap. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding as she tried to process the weight of it. Was she happy? The answer should have been simple. She had everything: a successful career, a stable fiancé, a life that others envied. But as Alex's words echoed in her mind, Olivia realized she didn't know how to answer. She faltered, the words sticking in her throat. "I think so. I mean, I should be, right?" "That's not what I asked," Alex said gently but firmly. "I didn't ask if you should be. I asked if you are." Olivia stared at her, the noise of the cafe fading into the background. No one had ever asked her that before, not like this. Richard had never questioned her contentment, and Olivia had never volunteered it. Her parents, her friends, even her own thoughts, they all operated on the assumption that her life was perfect. But now, faced with Alex's piercing gaze and disarming honesty, she couldn't hide behind those assumptions anymore. "I don't know," Olivia said finally, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I'm happy." Alex nodded as if she had expected the answer. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "That's honest," she said softly. "Most people can't even admit that much." The conversation shifted, but the weight of Alex's question lingered in the air. Olivia found herself opening up in ways she hadn't anticipated, sharing bits and pieces of her carefully constructed life. She told Alex about her job, her engagement, the wedding plans that felt more like a checklist than a celebration. She spoke haltingly at first, but Alex's steady, unjudging presence drew the words out of her, like water finding its way through cracks. "You've built this perfect little life," Alex said after a while, her voice thoughtful. "But it sounds more like a script than something you've chosen." Olivia frowned, the observation cutting too close to the truth. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Alex said, leaning forward again, "it sounds like you've been checking off boxes your whole life. Good grades, good job, good fiancé, good wedding. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself what you actually want?" The question felt like another thunderclap, reverberating through Olivia's chest. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. "Of course I have," she said defensively, but the words rang hollow even as she said them. Alex raised an eyebrow, her expression somewhere between curious and amused. "Have you?" she pressed. "Or have you just been doing what everyone else expects?" Olivia's stomach twisted. She wanted to argue, to push back against Alex's audacity, but she couldn't. The truth was she hadn't asked herself what she wanted, not really. Her life had been a series of steps, each one carefully chosen to fit a narrative of success and stability. She had followed the path laid out for her without ever questioning where it led. "I don't know," Olivia admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know what I want." Alex smiled then, but it wasn't smug or condescending. It was understanding, almost kind. "That's okay," she said. "Most people don't. But maybe it's time to start figuring it out." The tension between them was palpable, a current that seemed to hum just beneath the surface of every word, every glance. Alex had a way of looking at Olivia that made her feel both exposed and electrified, like every part of her that had been dormant was suddenly waking up. It wasn't just attraction, though that was undeniable. It was something deeper, something Olivia couldn't yet name. As their conversation wound down, Alex reached across the table, her fingers brushing lightly against Olivia's hand. The touch was brief, almost casual, but it sent a jolt through Olivia's entire body. She looked up sharply, her breath hitching as their eyes met again. "Don't overthink it," Alex said softly, her voice laced with both challenge and reassurance. "Sometimes the best things happen when you stop trying to control everything." Olivia couldn't speak. The touch, the words, the intensity in Alex's gaze. It was too much and yet not enough. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground beneath her crumbling, but instead of fear, all she felt was exhilaration. When Alex finally stood to leave, Olivia felt an inexplicable pang of loss. She wanted to say something, to ask for more time, but the words caught in her throat. Alex shrugged on her leather jacket, her movements fluid and confident, and looked back at Olivia with a faint smile. "Take care, Olivia," she said. "And don't forget, you can rewrite the script." With that she was gone, leaving Olivia sitting in the dimly lit cafe, her heart racing and her mind spinning. Alex's questions echoed in her head louder than ever. "Are you happy? Or just following the script?" For the first time Olivia felt the cracks in her carefully constructed life widen, and instead of fear she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Hope. The drive home was a blur. Rain tapped rhythmically against the windshield, the wipers swishing back and forth in a steady cadence, but Olivia barely noticed. Her thoughts were too loud, a chaotic swirl of Alex's words, her piercing gaze, the warmth of her fingers brushing against Olivia's hand. It was as if a piece of her had been unmoored, drifting into unfamiliar territory, and no matter how hard she tried she couldn't anchor herself. "Are you happy? Or just following the script?" Alex's voice echoed in her mind, each word striking like a bell, reverberating through the walls Olivia had spent years building. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to push the thoughts away. This was madness. Alex was just a stranger, a fleeting moment in her carefully ordered life. There was no reason to let her have this much power over her. But as Olivia parked in the driveway and stared at the warm glow of the apartment windows, she felt the weight of the truth settle in her chest. The reason Alex's words lingered wasn't because of who she was. It was because of what they had revealed. Inside, the familiar scent of Richard's cooking greeted her. He stood in the kitchen, dressed in his usual after-work attire of a sweater and jeans, humming softly as he stirred something on the stove. The sight should have been comforting, grounding. Instead, Olivia felt an overwhelming sense of displacement, like she was walking into someone else's life. "Hey, you're home," Richard said with a smile, looking up as she stepped inside. "I thought you'd be later." "Dinner's almost ready." Olivia managed a weak smile, hanging her coat by the door. "Traffic wasn't as bad as I expected." Richard wiped his hands on a dish towel, crossing the room to kiss her cheek. The gesture was familiar, easy, but Olivia stiffened slightly under his touch. She hoped he didn't notice. "Everything okay?" he asked, pulling back to study her face. "You seem distracted." "I'm fine," she replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a long day. Work's been non-stop." Richard nodded, accepting the explanation without question. "Makes sense. You've been juggling a lot lately. The wedding, work. It's a lot for anyone." She nodded, grateful for the out. "Exactly. Just tired, I guess." They sat down to dinner, the clinking of silverware filling the quiet between them. Richard talked about his day, recounting a particularly difficult surgery with the kind of calm confidence Olivia had always admired. She nodded in the right places, offering murmurs of agreement, but her mind was miles away. She couldn't stop thinking about Alex, her voice, her boldness, the way she had looked at Olivia as if seeing something no one else ever had. The memory of that touch lingered like an ember, warm and persistent. Every time Olivia tried to focus on Richard's words, her mind drifted back to Alex's question. "What do you actually want? Live?" Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. She blinked, realizing he was watching her with a concerned expression. "Sorry, what?" "I asked if you want to finalize the seating chart tomorrow," he said slowly. "You seem really out of it tonight." Olivia set down her fork, taking a deep breath. I'm sorry. I've just been preoccupied. Richard reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was steady, familiar, but it lacked the spark that had coursed through her when Alex had touched her. The realization sent a pang of guilt through Olivia's chest. It's okay, Richard said gently. I know the wedding's been stressful. We're almost there though. Just a few more weeks and then we can finally relax. Olivia nodded, forcing another smile. You're right. It'll all be worth it. But as the words left her mouth, they felt hollow. Would it be worth it? She had been telling herself that for months, pushing through the endless planning and decisions, convincing herself that the life she was building with Richard was the right one. But now that certainty felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Later that night, Olivia lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Richard was already asleep beside her, his breathing steady and calm. She turned her head, watching the rise and fall of his chest. He was everything she was supposed to want. Kind, dependable, a man who loved her without question. She should have felt safe, content. But instead she felt trapped. Her phone sat on the nightstand, the faint glow of the screen casting a soft light in the dark room. She reached for it, her fingers brushing against the edge as if drawn by an invisible force. Opening her messages, she scrolled to Alex's number, her heart pounding as she reread their brief exchange. Are you happy? Or just following the script? The words were burned into her mind, a challenge she couldn't ignore. For so long Olivia had been living according to a plan, a perfectly crafted narrative that left no room for doubt, no space for deviation. But Alex had cracked something open, a door Olivia hadn't even known was there. And now that it was open she couldn't close it. She closed her eyes, Alex's face flashing in her mind. The smirk, the intensity in her eyes, the way she had made Olivia feel seen in a way no one else ever had. Terrified her. But it also exhilarated her. The next morning Olivia woke to Richard already dressed, coffee in hand. He leaned down to kiss her forehead before heading out the door, leaving her alone in the quiet apartment. She sat up slowly, her mind still clouded with thoughts of Alex. She told herself it had been a distraction, a momentary lapse. But the truth was impossible to ignore. Alex had ignited something in her, a spark she couldn't put out. And now, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't go back to the way things were. By day, Olivia lived the life everyone expected of her. She reviewed guest lists with Richard, nodded along as her mother fretted over flower arrangements, and answered emails about color schemes and catering. Her smiles were polished, her responses measured, and her demeanor serene. To anyone watching, she was the picture of a woman about to embark on the perfect life. But by night, Olivia's reality fractured into something far more complicated. When the house grew quiet, when Richard turned in early after a long shift at the hospital, Olivia's carefully curated facade cracked. She would retreat to the living room, her phone tucked into her hands like a secret she couldn't let go of. And every night the same name lit up her screen. Alex. Their conversations started innocently enough, at least on the surface. Alex would ask how her day had gone, and Olivia would respond with guarded honesty. But Alex had a way of peeling back Olivia's defenses, her questions probing deeper with each exchange. How's the script going? Alex had texted one night and Olivia's heart had skipped a beat. She knew exactly what Alex meant. Complicated, Olivia had typed back, her fingers trembling slightly. Good. Complicated means you're thinking, Alex replied. Meet me tomorrow night? Same cafe? Olivia hesitated, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She glanced toward the bedroom where Richard slept soundly, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. She thought about the wedding invitations stacked neatly on the kitchen counter, the life she had spent years building. But then she thought of Alex. Her boldness, her honesty, the way she made Olivia feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Okay, Olivia had replied and the die was cast. Their meetings became a ritual, a secret tether binding them tighter with each encounter. At first it was always the cafe, neutral ground, familiar, public. They would sit across from each other, Alex's sketchbook between them, Olivia's coffee growing cold as they talked about everything and nothing. Alex had a way of drawing Olivia out, coaxing her into revealing pieces of herself she had kept hidden even from herself. You ever think about running away? Alex asked one night, her voice low and conspiratorial. Olivia's lips parted, her heart racing at the suggestion. Running away from what? Alex smirked, leaning closer. From all of it. The expectations, the rules, the life you didn't choose. Doesn't it ever get exhausting? Olivia swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. It's not that simple. It could be, Alex countered, her gaze steady. You just have to decide you're worth the risk. As the days turned into weeks, their meetings shifted. Alex invited Olivia into her world. Quiet bars tucked into shadowy corners of the city, art galleries where the air buzzed with creativity, and eventually her studio. It was there, surrounded by canvases splashed with bold colors and chaotic lines, that Olivia felt the pull between them become impossible to ignore. One evening, after another long day of wedding planning, Olivia found herself standing in Alex's studio, her breath catching at the sight of the room. It was a mess of paint-smeared palettes, half-finished pieces, and the faint smell of turpentine. But it felt alive in a way Olivia's world never had. This is where the magic happens, Alex said with a grin, gesturing to the room. She stepped closer, her eyes sparkling with mischief. What do you think? I think, Olivia hesitated, her voice trembling. I think it's incredible. It's free. Alex's smile softened and she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against Olivia's wrist. The touch was fleeting but electric, sending a jolt through Olivia that left her breathless. You could be free too, Alex said, her voice barely above a whisper. If you let yourself. Olivia's chest tightened, the weight of Alex's words pressing down on her. She wanted to argue, to say that her life was fine the way it was, but the truth was undeniable. Alex had seen through her, past the polished exterior and into the cracks she had spent years trying to hide. Their relationship intensified, the line between curiosity and desire blurring with every touch, every lingering glance. Alex didn't try to hide her feelings. She was bold, unapologetic, and unrelenting in her pursuit of Olivia. And Olivia, for all her resistance, found herself drawn deeper into Alex's orbit. One night, as they sat on the worn couch in Alex's studio, their conversation turned to the wedding. Olivia had avoided the topic as much as possible, but Alex had a way of coaxing the truth out of her. Do you even want to marry him? Alex asked bluntly, her eyes locked onto Olivia's. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. I don't know, she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I thought I did. But no. I'm not sure. Alex reached out, her hand resting on Olivia's knee. The touch was firm but gentle, grounding Olivia as the weight of her confession settled between them. It's okay not to know, Alex said softly. But you owe it to yourself to figure it out. You deserve to be happy, Olivia. Not just comfortable. The words sent a shiver down Olivia's spine, her chest tightening with the ache of everything she had been avoiding. What if I don't know how to be happy? She whispered, her voice trembling. Alex smiled then, a small, sad smile that carried more understanding than Olivia expected. You'll figure it out, she said. But you can't do it while you're pretending to be someone you're not. That night, as Olivia lay awake in bed beside Richard, Alex's words echoed in her mind. The life she had built, the perfect facade she had spent years maintaining, it all felt like a prison now, each choice a bar she couldn't break. But with Alex, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. And possibility, she realized, was far more dangerous than certainty. The argument with Richard started over something small. A disagreement about the table arrangements for the reception. Olivia had mentioned wanting to make a few adjustments to the guest list, but Richard dismissed the idea without a second thought, saying they were running out of time for changes. His tone was clipped, his attention focused more on his phone than on her, and it sent a jolt of irritation through Olivia's already fraying nerves. It's my wedding too, you know, she had said, her voice sharper than she intended. Of course it is, Richard replied, barely looking up. But we've already agreed on everything. There's no point in rehashing it now. That's the problem, Olivia snapped. Everything feels decided. There's no room for anything else. Richard sighed, setting his phone down. You're overthinking again. It's all going to be fine. You're just stressed. The word stressed landed like a slap. Olivia's frustration boiled over, the weight of weeks, no years, of unspoken doubts crashing down on her. Maybe I am, but you're not even listening to me. I'm trying, Olivia, Richard said, his voice tight with exasperation. But you've been impossible to talk to lately. What's really going on here? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because how could she explain the chaos inside her? How could she tell him that every choice, every decision, felt like it was pushing her further into a life she wasn't sure she wanted anymore? Instead, she grabbed her coat and her keys, her chest heaving as she fled the apartment. The rain hit her face as she stepped into the night, cold and sharp, but she barely noticed. Her hands shook as she dialed Alex's number, her breath hitching as the line rang. Alex answered on the second ring, her voice low and steady. "Olivia? Can I come over?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. There was a pause, just long enough for Olivia's heart to skip a beat. Then Alex said, "Always." Alex's studio was exactly as Olivia remembered, chaotic, colorful, and alive. The walls were lined with canvases in various stages of completion, their bold, sweeping strokes a sharp contrast to the sterile perfection of Olivia's world. The air smelled faintly of paint and turpentine, grounding Olivia as she stepped inside, her damp hair clinging to her cheeks. Alex stood in the center of the room, barefoot, wearing a loose-fitting shirt streaked with paint. Her eyes softened as she saw Olivia, the faintest hint of concern flashing across her face. "Rough night?" she asked. Olivia let out a shaky laugh, pulling her coat tighter around her. "You could say that." Alex gestured toward the couch in the corner, her movements calm and unhurried. "Sit. I'll get you something to drink." Olivia obeyed, sinking onto the worn cushions as Alex moved to a small kitchenette in the corner. She returned a moment later with 2 glasses of wine, handing one to Olivia before sitting beside her. For a while they didn't speak, the quiet punctuated only by the faint hum of the city outside. The silence was comforting, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension Olivia had left behind. "You want to talk about it?" Alex asked finally, her voice gentle. Olivia hesitated, staring into her glass. "I don't know where to start." "Start anywhere," Alex said. "Or don't. I'm not here to push." That was the difference, Olivia realized. Alex never pushed. She challenged, yes, but always with a care that left Olivia feeling seen rather than judged. It was a kind of freedom Olivia hadn't known she craved. "I had another fight with Richard," Olivia said eventually, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm suffocating." Alex didn't respond right away, her eyes studying Olivia with quiet intensity. Then she reached out, her hand resting lightly on Olivia's knee. "You don't have to stay in a life that's killing you," she said softly. The words hit Olivia like a floodgate bursting open. She set her glass down, her hands trembling as tears welled in her eyes. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I've spent so long being who everyone wants me to be. I don't know what I want." Alex shifted closer, her hand moving to cup Olivia's cheek. The touch was firm yet achingly gentle, her thumb brushing away a stray tear. "I think you do," Alex said, her voice steady. "You're just afraid to admit it." Their eyes locked, the air between them charged with something Olivia couldn't ignore any longer. Her breath hitched as Alex leaned in, their faces inches apart. "Olivia," Alex whispered, her voice low and filled with a vulnerability that sent shivers down Olivia's spine. "Tell me what you want." And for the first time Olivia didn't hold back. She closed the distance between them, her lips crashing against Alex's in a kiss that was raw and desperate and utterly liberating. Alex responded immediately, her hands sliding around Olivia's waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, fierce and unrelenting, as if years of suppressed longing were finally finding their voice. The room seemed to blur around them, the world outside fading into insignificance. Alex's hands roamed Olivia's back, their touch grounding her even as she felt like she might float away. Olivia's fingers tangled in Alex's hair, pulling her closer, her heart pounding in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. When they finally broke apart, Olivia's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath. Alex rested her forehead against Olivia's, her eyes searching hers with an intensity that left Olivia feeling exposed and whole all at once. "You're incredible," Alex murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how incredible you are." Olivia let out a shaky laugh, tears streaming down her cheeks as she cupped Alex's face in her hands. "I think I'm starting to," she whispered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia felt whole. The confrontation happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of quiet, overcast day that seemed made for staying in bed. Olivia was in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee, when she heard Richard's voice from behind her. Olivia, he said, his tone sharp and unfamiliar. We need to talk. She turned, startled by the intensity in his voice. Richard was holding her phone, his jaw tight, his knuckles white against the casing. Olivia's stomach dropped. The edges of the world seemed to blur as she watched him set the phone on the counter, his eyes fixed on hers. What is this? He demanded, his voice barely controlled. These messages. Who is Alex? Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't need to look at the phone to know what he'd seen. The late-night texts, the secret plans, the string of words that carried more emotion than she had dared admit even to herself. They were all there, laid bare, a stark contrast to the life she and Richard had been building, or pretending to build. Olivia started, her voice trembling. She set the coffee mug down with a clatter, her hands shaking. It's not what you think. Then tell me, Richard said, his voice cracking. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me. To us. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. Olivia could feel the weight of his gaze, the hurt and anger radiating off him like a storm. She wanted to deny it, to tell him it wasn't what it seemed, but the truth was right there in front of them, undeniable. I met her a few weeks ago, Olivia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. At a cafe. Richard's expression hardened. And we've been talking, she admitted, her words stumbling over themselves. That's all. Talking, Richard repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. He picked up the phone, scrolling through the messages. This doesn't look like just talking, Olivia. It looks like you've been sneaking around behind my back. Olivia's chest tightened, guilt and fear twisting together until she could barely breathe. It's not like that, she insisted, though she could hear the hollowness in her own voice. I wasn't trying to hurt you. But you did, Richard snapped, his voice rising. Do you have any idea what this feels like? To find out the person I'm about to marry has been falling for someone else? The words hit Olivia like a blow. She hadn't let herself think of it in those terms. Not fully, not consciously, but hearing it spoken aloud made it impossible to deny. Her feelings for Alex weren't just a distraction. They were real and they had changed everything. I don't know what I'm doing, Olivia said, her voice breaking. I don't know who I am anymore, Richard. I feel like I've been living a life that doesn't belong to me. And what does that mean for us? Richard asked, his voice trembling. Do you even want this? Do you want me? Olivia's eyes filled with tears, her throat tightening as she tried to find the words. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I don't know what I want. Richard turned away, running a hand through his hair. The sight of him, so strong and steady, now so visibly shaken, sent a pang of guilt through Olivia's chest. She loved him, or at least she had thought she did. But now, standing in the wreckage of their relationship, she realized that love wasn't the same as belonging, and comfort wasn't the same as happiness. I thought I knew you, Richard said, his back still turned. I thought I knew what we were building. But now I don't even recognize you. Richard, Olivia said softly, stepping closer. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a pain that made Olivia's chest ache. Then why, Olivia? Why did you let it? I don't know, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I've been so lost. For so long I've been doing what everyone expected of me, trying to be the person everyone thought I should be. But when I met Alex, she made me realize how much of myself I've been hiding. Richard's face twisted, a mix of heartbreak and frustration. So you're leaving me for her? Is that it? I don't know, Olivia said again, her voice trembling. It's not about her. It's about me. I need to figure out who I am. And I can't do that if I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. The room fell into a heavy silence. Richard stared at her for a long moment, his expression a battlefield of emotions. Finally he shook his head, his voice quieter but no less raw. I thought we were partners, he said. I thought we were building a life together. I thought so too, Olivia said, her voice breaking. But maybe I was building the wrong life. Richard's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words struck Olivia with a bittersweet pang. She reached out, her hand resting on his arm. You deserve someone who's sure, she said, tears streaming down her face. Someone who can give you everything you deserve. And right now I'm not that person. Later, after Richard had left for a walk to clear his head, Olivia sat alone in the living room, the weight of the confrontation settling over her. She felt raw, exposed, like she had been stripped down to her core. And yet, beneath the guilt and sadness, there was a flicker of something else, relief. For the first time she had been honest. Not just with Richard but with herself. She had admitted the truth she had been running from for so long, that the life she had been living wasn't hers and that she needed, something different. It wasn't just about Alex. Alex had opened the door, yes, but what lay beyond it was bigger than any one person. It was the possibility of being real, of being whole, of finally stepping into the version of herself she had spent her entire life suppressing. And as Olivia sat in the quiet apartment, her tears drying, she realized that possibility scared her more than anything. But it also gave her hope. The decision to call off the wedding came with a clarity Olivia hadn't expected, but that didn't make it any less painful. She sat across from Richard in the living room, the soft light of the afternoon casting long shadows on the walls. He was silent as she spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. "I can't marry you," Olivia said, the words heavy but freeing. "It's not fair to you, to either of us, for me to go through with this when I'm not sure. You deserve someone who's completely sure. And I deserve to figure out who I am." Richard's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edge of the couch. For a moment Olivia thought he might argue, try to convince her to stay. But when he looked up, his eyes were glassy with unshed tears. "I thought we were happy," he said quietly. "I thought I knew you." Olivia's chest tightened. "I thought I knew me too. But I've been hiding parts of myself for so long, I don't even know where to start finding them again." "Is it her?" Richard asked, his voice breaking. "Is it Alex?" Olivia hesitated, her heart aching at the pain in his voice. "It's not just her," she said honestly. "Alex made me realize how lost I've been, but this isn't about her. It's about me." Richard exhaled sharply, looking down at his hands. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice trembling. "But I can't force you to stay." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she reached out, her hand resting on his. "You'll always mean so much to me," she said softly. "But I can't keep pretending. Not with you. Not with myself." When she left their shared apartment later that evening, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her, Olivia felt both a crushing sadness and an overwhelming sense of relief. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her heart ached for what she was leaving behind. But for the first time she felt like she was walking toward something that was truly hers. She checked into a modest hotel downtown, her body heavy with exhaustion. Alone in the quiet room, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked the same, but everything about her felt different. She felt raw, like she had been stripped bare. And yet, beneath the vulnerability, there was a glimmer of strength. Days turned into weeks as Olivia began to rebuild her life, piece by piece. She spent her mornings walking through the city, her afternoons lost in work, and her evenings talking to Alex. Their relationship deepened in ways Olivia hadn't anticipated. Alex was a storm, unpredictable, intense, and exhilarating, and Olivia found herself drawn to her in a way she couldn't resist. But there was a part of Alex that remained just out of reach. While she was open about her feelings for Olivia, she kept her past shrouded in mystery. When Olivia asked about her family or where she had lived before Seattle, Alex would deflect, turning the conversation back to Olivia. It was frustrating, but Olivia tried to respect Alex's boundaries, telling herself that Alex would share when she was ready. Still, the distance between them grew harder to ignore. One evening, they were in Alex's studio, the room bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Alex was sketching, her hands moving fluidly over the paper, while Olivia sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through one of Alex's old notebooks. She stopped on a page filled with chaotic scribbles and phrases, one of them circled repeatedly. "Run, run, run." "What's this about?" Olivia asked, holding up the notebook. Alex froze, her pencil hovering mid-air. For a moment the room felt heavier, the air charged with something Olivia couldn't quite place. "Nothing," Alex said, her voice clipped. "Just old thoughts." "It doesn't look like nothing," Olivia pressed gently. "You've never talked about why you came to Seattle." Alex set the pencil down, her movements deliberate. "Because it doesn't matter," she said, her tone sharper than Olivia had ever heard it. "Why are we talking about this?" "Because I want to know you," Olivia said, her voice soft but firm. "All of you. Not just the parts you let me see." Alex stood abruptly, running a hand through her hair. She turned away, her posture tense. I don't see why it matters. The past is the past. But it shaped you, Olivia countered, standing as well. Whatever you're running from, it's still a part of you. And if we're going to be real with each other, I need to understand. Alex let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. You think you want to know, but you don't. Try me, Olivia said, stepping closer. For a long moment Alex didn't move. Then slowly she turned to face Olivia, her expression raw and vulnerable in a way Olivia had never seen before. I've made mistakes, Alex said finally, her voice trembling. Big ones. I hurt people. And instead of facing it, I ran. I've been running ever since. What kind of mistakes? Olivia asked gently, her heart aching at the pain in Alex's voice. Alex hesitated, her jaw tightening. I was in a relationship, she said finally. It got messy. And when it all fell apart, I didn't handle it well. I burned bridges. Left without saying goodbye. I didn't know how to fix it, so I didn't even try. The words hung heavy in the air, a confession wrapped in regret. Olivia stepped closer, her hand reaching out to cup Alex's cheek. You're not that person anymore, she said softly. You're here. You're trying. Alex's eyes filled with tears, her hand covering Olivia's. What if I can't fix it? What if I can't be the person you deserve? You don't have to be perfect, Olivia said, her voice steady. You just have to be honest. With me. With yourself. That night, as they lay tangled together on the studio floor, the storm between them finally quieted. Olivia didn't have all the answers and neither did Alex. But for the first time they weren't running, from their pasts or from each other. And for Olivia that felt like a beginning. The shift between them was subtle at first, like the changing tide, slow, deliberate, but impossible to miss. After Alex's confession, the air in their relationship grew heavier with understanding and unspoken promises. There were still moments of tension, moments when Alex would retreat into herself, her expression distant as if haunted by the past she had only begun to reveal. But Olivia had made her choice. She would trust Alex, not blindly, but with the quiet determination of someone who had learned that love could only flourish where honesty lived. Their days together became a delicate balance of light and shadow. Alex's studio remained their haven, the place where they could shed the masks they wore for the world outside. Olivia would sit cross-legged on the worn couch, watching Alex paint, her movements fluid and unrestrained. Sometimes Alex would hum under her breath, a low, soothing sound that filled the space like a gentle wave. What are you thinking about? Olivia asked one afternoon, her voice cutting through the quiet. Alex paused, her brush hovering over the canvas. She didn't look back as she answered, her tone contemplative. That I never thought I'd be here. In Seattle? Olivia asked. In this moment, Alex said, turning to meet Olivia's gaze. Her eyes were soft, vulnerable. With you. Olivia's heart ached at the honesty in Alex's voice. She stood, crossing the room to stand beside her, her fingers brushing against Alex's arm. Is that a bad thing? She asked softly. Alex shook her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. No. It scares me, but it's not bad. Olivia smiled back, her chest tightening with an emotion that felt almost like relief. I'm scared too, she admitted. But I think that's okay. Alex began to open up in pieces, like fragments of a story she wasn't sure how to tell. Late one night as they lay on the couch, her head resting on Olivia's lap, she spoke about the choices that had led her to Seattle. There was someone, Alex said quietly, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on Olivia's thigh. Before I came here. We were together for a long time, but it wasn't good. We brought out the worst in each other. Olivia's hand stilled in Alex's hair, her breath catching. What happened? Alex hesitated, her jaw tightening. I stayed longer than I should have. Kept hoping things would change, that I could fix it. But instead I ended up hurting her. And myself. The weight of the confession hung in the air, but Olivia didn't pull away. She ran her fingers through Alex's hair, her voice soft. You're not that person anymore. Alex looked up at her, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. How do you know? Because I see you, Olivia said simply. And I trust what I see. Alex exhaled shakily, a tear slipping down her cheek. I don't deserve you, she whispered. You don't get to decide that, Olivia said, her voice steady. I do. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Alex's past lingered like a shadow, and there were days when the weight of it pulled her into herself, leaving Olivia unsure of how to reach her. But each time Alex came back, her apologies quiet but genuine, her effort clear. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop of Alex's building, the city lights twinkling below them, Alex broke the silence. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to fix the things I've done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you make me want to try." Olivia turned to her, her breath catching at the raw emotion in Alex's expression. "That's all I need," she said. "Just try. Be here. Be honest." Alex nodded, her fingers intertwining with Olivia's. "I will," she promised. "For you. For us." As the weeks passed, Olivia began to feel the emptiness inside her start to fade. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It was slow and uneven, like the first tentative steps of someone learning to walk again. But it was real. She found herself smiling more, laughing freely, and leaning into the moments of joy without fear or hesitation. She and Alex began to explore the city together, their adventures small but meaningful. They visited bookstores and art galleries, walked through parks in the rain, and stayed up late talking about everything from their favorite movies to the fears that kept them awake at night. Each moment felt like a new thread weaving the fabric of their lives together. One night, as they lay tangled in bed, Olivia stared at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting. "Do you ever wonder where we'll end up?" she asked. Alex turned onto her side, propping herself up on one elbow. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I try not to think too far ahead. I don't want to miss what's right in front of me." Olivia smiled, turning to face her. "And what's right in front of you?" Alex's lips curved into a soft smile. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Olivia's cheek. "You." Their journey wasn't perfect. There were still unanswered questions, still pieces of Alex's past that she hadn't shared and might never be ready to. But Olivia found that she didn't need all the answers. What mattered was the present. The way Alex made her feel alive, seen, and whole in a way she had never thought possible. And for Alex, Olivia became more than a partner. She became a reason to stop running. With Olivia, she found the courage to face her demons, one step at a time. The future was uncertain, but as they stood together on the rooftop one last time, the city stretching out before them, Olivia felt a quiet hope settle in her chest. She didn't need to have all the answers, and neither did Alex. They had each other, and that was enough. For the first time, Olivia wasn't afraid of the unknown. She had traded the script she had followed for so long for something real, something messy and beautiful in hers. And as Alex wrapped her arms around her, pressing a kiss to her temple, Olivia closed her eyes, letting herself believe in the possibility of happiness. Not the perfect, polished kind she had been chasing, but the raw, imperfect kind she was finally ready to embrace.